Yagara people. We acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples as the First Nation owners of the lands of where QUT now stands. For thousands of years, the Turrbal and Yagara people have gathered along the banks of Mavis, the Brisbane River, to share their knowledge and stories. We pay our respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands where QUT now stands have always been places of teaching, researching, and learning. We acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within our QUT community. From Moreton Bay inland as far as the Great Dividing Range near Warwick and Toowoomba, as far north as the Caboolture River, including the lands around Brisbane City, Antony, Yura Yura, Yinala, Balka Bi Balka, and welcome to the traditional country of the Turrbal and Yagara people.
And welcome. I'm Antony Peloso, a corporate educator and advisory specialist here at the graduate school, QUTX at QUT. So it's great to see you all at this bright and early morning. So thank you very much. I'd also like to say hello to all the people online. We have about 35 folks online and a very lovely contingent from Canberra as well. So thank you for being online and ready for us. I too would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people. This is a very special place of learning, and QUT and our First Nations people are collaborators in the delivery of high quality education. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge and welcome Bob O'Connor, who's our Executive Director, and he leads the Graduate School of Business and QUTX. Bob, thank you.
Thanks, Tony, and good morning. I'd like to also acknowledge Uncle Chug and the welcome to country that he's just given us there. And it really highlights to me that leadership comes in many forms. But why do we do leadership? We do it for collectiveness. In economic terms, we might say we do it for leverage and scale. But the power of collectiveness, working together for a goal. So business transformation is about leadership. And leadership is the art of collectiveness. And collectiveness is the toughest task around decision making. How do we make decisions? Where do we want to be? What's our aspirations? Underpinning objectives, targets, goals. So you can see the power of leadership is about bringing people on a journey, bringing people to a common place that they probably helped you define. So the question for us as all as leaders is, how do we use our power as leaders to empower, to bring the collective to a place where we can make the world a better place? And that's the aspirations of the graduate school. Leadership and decision making to make the world a better place. So the essence of today of business transformation is nothing more than the art of leadership that we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. As Uncle Chug would say, probably for 60,000 years in this country. So the question for us now is, how do we empower the collective to truly make this world a better place? So today, Tony, Stephen, Cathy will actually give us some great insights in doing that. And I'd like you to look forward to that presentation. Thank you.
Great, okay. Great. Bob, thank you so much. Thank you. And very important words and heartfelt and very rich for us. So I've already mentioned, as well as the people online and the wonderful group of folks here, we also are recording this today because this is the beginning of a series, the Enterprise Transformation Equation series. So today is the launch. So we'll actually be capturing these. A couple of things that I want to tell you about. On the seats, there are some question cards. So as you're going, please, if you don't mind filling in your questions, put your names on those for us. And if you're happy where you actually come from, so you actually know, so we know the context, and we're going to read out questions as we go. For those of you online, we have people on standby who are actually going to be, Kim's going to be collecting your questions as well. So please put the same thing, write your questions, get them through, and also make sure that you put your name on those for us if you would. So organisational transformation is complex and it's demanding. And with focused leadership, which really is very much what we're going to talk about today, is there needs to be a clear rationale for change, that very strong why, and agility to deal with the challenges in this complex world. That really is what we're here to explore today. Now, first of all, I want to introduce my wonderful long-term colleague, Dr. Catherine C. Cathy and I have worked together for, I think, 6 years at least now, and we have been involved in a significant number of change elements. We also work together on a program called Leading for Reform for Australian Defence. So this is sort of a beautiful link in all of these transformation efforts. I also want to thank George, who has gone to an enormous amount of trouble to make this incredible high-tech process work for us today. Christine working with him, and Kim also, who is doing an incredible job behind the scenes. And I do also want to acknowledge Dr. Peter Bevan, who is the leader of what we call OPE, or Open Professional Education, and a great inspiration to us, and also the wonderful Professor Rowena Barrett, who leads QUT Entrepreneurship. So thank you, and all the rest of you for being here. Thank you so very much. So on that point, I'm going to thank Cathy for all her work in prepping, and I'm just going to turn this over to Cathy, which is an important piece. Cathy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. And can I just add my welcome to everyone and to our colleagues online. I hope you'll forgive me for referring to a couple of notes as I share a little of Stephen's story. There's a lot of detail in Stephen's career history that I don't want to get wrong, particularly in a room of people that may know more than me about the Defence Force. So Major General Stephen Porter, AO, graduated from the Royal Military College in the early 80s. I won't completely disclose your age. And soon after was appointed to the 1st Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment and had a number of leadership roles across Australia throughout the 80s. In 1990, he served with the United Nations in Iran and was again overseas in the late 90s in the United States as the Australian Exchange Officer at the headquarters of the 1st US Corps. In the early 2000s, Major General Porter served as the Australian Exchange in the United Kingdom Joint Service Command and Staff College, and on return to Australia, assumed the appointment as Director, Future Warfighting and Joint Experimentation. Heck of a business card, Stephen. And then in November 2005, took up the appointment as Deputy Chief of Staff of the multinational force in Iraq. And it was for this service that he was awarded the United States Bronze Star. There have been a number of senior command positions since then, but we're particularly interested in 2015 when Stephen was appointed as the Commander of 2nd Division. And it's this piece of work over some years that we'll be exploring today. During our session, we'll firstly hear some general thoughts from Stephen about the transformation work that he undertook within the Army Reserve. And then we have a few questions, most of them that Stephen hasn't seen yet. And then we'll open up to your questions. As Tony mentioned, if you could capture your questions on the notes on your seat, and with your name, if possible, our colleagues will collect those from you, the chat function for those online, and we'll hope to get through as many questions as we possibly can. And so for now, I'll hand over and help you with the talking stick. Stephen, if you could join me in welcoming Major General Stephen Porter.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, colleagues online, to everyone in the room. Thank you very much for the introduction. Backing into Bob's point, transformation is not something for the faint-hearted, and it is an engagement and a leadership engagement over time. Too many organisations, too many leaders say, I'm going to transform the organisation, I'm going to change it, write a directive and leave it. And that is going to get you nowhere. It will get your people disenfranchised. They won't be connected with the why, and what the eventual outcome is. So for me, the time I spent, the 4 years I spent transforming the Army Reserve, and the 3 years prior to that, where I was fortunate to be commander of some of the experimentation that led to the thinking, then allowed us to transform this organisation from one which was an organisation which viewed itself as a strategic force, whereby it would be used in times of great need by Australia, and there would be a massive lead time for it to be ready, similar to the forces or the forces going overseas in World War I and World War II, to an operational reserve that could be used in a defined period for a defined task. So why? So what led us to that thinking? In the early 2000s, the force structure people who right across the world, right across the Western world, had decided that large standing armies were no longer, and that there would be a warfare edge given by technology. So basically we were trading personnel for greater improvements in technology, which for peer-on-peer competitors, view the United States versus the USSR or Russia as it became, was a fair logical leap. But the rise of asymmetric warfare, the rise of the Taliban, the rise of Al-Qaeda, the rise of the Islamic State meant that that technological overmatch could no longer be used to win the physical confrontation of war. And so we found ourselves having to use more of our personnel and having to transfer more of our force structure into our reserve component, very heavily led by the United States through the National Guard. And they were very good at doing this. And eventually you would find Guard brigades, brigade 3,000 to 5,000 men and women, or a Guard division eventually, which would be somewhere between 10 and 15,000 personnel, actually online in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And so we're beginning to see the rise of more capable part-time forces and a move to professional part-time. And that was very important. Now, in the Australian context, our finances and our government had decided to cap the army at 30,000. And that was fair enough. That's the permanent force. And what we found was that we needed more capability. So we had to then lift the capacity and lift the capability of the reserve force. And that was something that in about 2012 we began to look at. And those who are associated with the army in those times would remember Plan Bathsheba. And Plan Bathsheba was the army's deliberate planning strategy to then get a more integrated army together as we worked forward. Now, there were going to be some problems as we started out. You had a cultural tension. You had an organisation which really looked at the Australian Regular Army at 30,000. All of our equipment in the main, all of our thinking was around how that 30,000 operated, and the part-time force or the reserve force was seen as an addition. So when we'd work equipment, we'd work 30,000, and there might be some for the reserve. Now we were beginning to think in terms of a total force. And General Angus Campbell began to coin the phrase, one army. And one army was a mix of people of regular, part-time, and what I would call a casual or standby reserve force. And I used to use the term, I went around the country, if you go to Woolworths, you don't ask someone for help and say, oh, are you a full-timer? Oh, are you a part-timer? Oh, you're a casual, I won't. No, they're an employee of that organisation. And we had to get our mindset around what that really meant for us. And our organisations were in stovepipes, the regular army, the reserve force, and then this standby reserve force. And the interactions weren't good. And we had to mould those interactions into a total force. And we had to appreciate what each component of the force brought to the table. And we had to appreciate and celebrate the way capability was generated. For a full-time force, it was full-time. You went to Kapuka, you went and did courses. It would take weeks of training and you would come out the other end. For the part-time force, we had to structure that training over a period of time to deliver, in many ways, the same training competencies over time, but you didn't get the experience the full-timers got. And you have full-time for a reason and you have part-time for a reason. And so over time, you could actually bring the two capabilities together. But if you imagine starting that, organisationally at the top of the Australian Army, that was problematic. So we began talking about this total force, one force, not two, not a regular army and not a part-time army. And I began talking about part-time, not reserve, to make the distinction that we needed a professional part-time force, not one that was really about casual engagement. And that was important not only for the total force, but it was important for the reserve force to understand that we were professionalising part-time. And that became part of where we really wanted to take the organisation. Other things that are important to us. Professional part-time is part-time. You had to define the roles and tasks clearly. If the full-time force could do 10 things, my proposition was the part-time force could do 3 or 4 things, and only ask us to do 3 or 4 things as we kick out the gate. If you wanted us to do more, there would be a greater lead time in training for us to achieve that. That makes logical sense. But of course, within the part-time organisation, who thought they could do everything, and they couldn't, and the full-time organisation who thought you could not do nothing, you had to really give confidence to the organisation that these 3 or 4 things out of the 10 we could do and do very well. And that was about proving the capability on the journey, which we had to do. The other great thing about this transformation, where there was a friction, was in the funding. There was always going to be funding problems. You imagine an army is set for 30,000 pieces of equipment, and now it's looking at 40,000 pieces of equipment. The money's got to come from somewhere. There is now a tension on allocation of resources because you're deliberately building a greater capacity. Not to the same extent, you don't need 15,000 pieces of equipment for a part-time force because people rotate in and out. But you need enough for them to feel valued. I remember going up to 3 Brigade and the 11th Brigade battle group, about 800 personnel, and they were all equipped in the same equipment as the regular force. You can imagine the feeling of the part-time soldiers, the value proposition that gave, when previously they had been in a generation behind. But that commitment meant that that equipment had to come from somewhere, and it came from one of the other regular force brigades. So you're beginning to trade resources in that regard. So they were some of the things we were looking at. And this is what we wanted to build. One force, recognising that you delivered capability, recognising the different ways of achieving that capability, all with the same value, ethos and history, and all delivering to one army across the spectrum. So I talked about the broader components, about force structure and about some of the tensions in army. What were the tensions I faced in the reserve force? We didn't talk about capability output before the transformation. Now we were clearly wedded to the fact that we had to produce an organisation consistently of about 700 personnel. And it had to be able to do 3 or 4 things that I talked about. The value proposition of part-time service was not understood clearly by both components of the force. In my view, the value proposition was that you contributed to capability, that you were trained, you were challenged, and there were opportunities. And General Campbell, as Chief of the Army, offered opportunities to the part-timers to actually deploy on overseas service with the full-time component, with their full-time personnel. And that was a commitment made by him as Chief, a commitment that was enshrined and everyone knew about. So our people then had a greater value. And I talked about the equipment piece. Culture and readiness, this idea of culture. We were now a capability organisation. When we met on Tuesday nights and weekends, it was no longer brewfests and chatting and having a social engagement. It was about getting ready and delivering output. And readiness is that point where how quickly can you get going to do the things you've been asked to do? And that was an important part within our organisation because that was about commitment. And I had to change the parading models of it. I had an organisation which was declining and ageing. And that's the way the reserve was seen, it was ageing. I had to reduce that. The percentage of females was appalling. We had to increase that. And that meant that we had to change the way that cultural fit went. Our proportion of Indigenous outside the regional force surveillance units, which sit across the whole of Northern Australia, was not as it should be. And General Campbell was very keen on trying to get female participation and Indigenous participation up. Our recruiting models were ineffective. Our barriers of entry, you could actually deploy to Afghanistan on a lower barrier of entry than you could to get into the Army Reserve. We had not adjusted those. We had not adjusted them for modern society. No wonder we were losing these fit young men and women who couldn't get into the place because the barriers were quite high. I eventually went to the Defence Force recruiting and found a document that they were working on, which had come from 2005. We're now talking 2015, and laid out the barriers to entry to the reserve. And I was amazed. Army had not actually sent a change in documentation down. It was our fault. It was my fault. Parading models where we work on capable, not available. We had been working on who's available, who can do this. No, who is the most capable person? This is the commitment that I'm willing to change. Training systems were ineffective. I wanted to achieve the same training curriculum outputs, less the experience. And I couldn't do that unless I used a mix of online, and we used a mixture of a blended training. You can imagine challenging the Army from the standard classroom into a blended model of training, and that was all very important. Allocations were linked to demography. I was of the view that if you changed your parading model, you could serve from anywhere in the country. Our ineffective structures and our technology was pretty ordinary. We had to work on that. So it led me to try and explain what I was trying to do to my own people and to those above me. And I coined this thing called the Enterprise Transformation Equation. But General Campbell and I had studied physics at Royal Military College, and we thought that an equation was quite a good way to describe it. What I was trying to do was to understand the components of the force that I had to change. Leadership, I had to change. Culture, the policies, the structures, the recruiting, training. I had to collectively train now. I had what I called tactical and technical competence that I had to lift. There was going to be a funding issue, and so on. What I was trying to also find as my journey went on was how these components interacted with the components that I wasn't changing, and how I would then be able to adjust things. Some of these changes, I had no idea of the follow-on impact. And that was very important to me. I had set metrics up, but there was a number of issues that we changed, and there was a number of ideas that we followed. And 2 or 3 months into it, my senior leaders are saying, this is not working. Now, it should work, but in actual fact, it is inhibiting something else. And that was very important to me. So I could use this enterprise transformation equation where I could understand what I was changing, and I could tell people what I was changing with metrics to it. And then we could monitor the second and third order consequences across the organisation. And that became very, very good. And I used to be able to brief this. And what I was after was constant capability up. And when I say security and stability operations, that are specific military operations which now relate to the Armed Reserve. That is the slockers of tasks. And of course, domestic response. And I would contend without the transformation, part-time force, the Armed Reserve would not have been able to cope with the recent bushfires or the problems we have had domestically where the Reserve has led our response to COVID-19. We would not have been able to do that as effectively because the organisation was not structured and capable to do that. So as we move on through the work that Tony has described, the batteries of change model will be being used, and for those coming upstairs later on with us afterwards, the batteries of change model we're going to use because it relates pretty close to the equation. I put this slide in, A, because it's a good look, and B, because this was a snapshot from a battlefield management system for the first collective battle group that the Reserve put in the field to support 3 Brigade in 2015. And each blue marker there represents an element of capability. That slide represents the Reserve battle group doing a number of tasks from the north, coming down to the southwest and going on to into the southern eastern part. That represents about 700 personnel doing a job. And you can see that they're actually, what I'm trying to show here is they were actually being used in the security and stability operations piece, actually effectively, and that's the way on that particular day, at that particular time, the force was outlined. Without transformation, we would not have been able to achieve that.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. So that's just a snapshot, I guess, of Stephen's transformation story. Now it's the hot seat time. But I did forget to mention that your original quals were maths and physics, and you've done an MBA, you're a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So I would imagine you love a puzzle. Would that be fair enough? That pulling things together and making things work.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And Stephen is day 12 of a new role as CEO of St John's Ambulance, Queensland. And while he was doing all this transformation work, was also CFO of Marist College, Ashgrove, off the side of his desk. So there's always a lot of transformation happening around you. I'm just wondering, because it's easy to look at something like defence and go, well, that's all very well, but you can just tell people what to do and they'll do it. In your new role, early days, but of those inhibitors for cultural transformation or enterprise transformation, what are the elements in your experience that can apply in any complex organisation?
Can I just take us back one step to one of your first points? And that was, there is a misnomer within general society that the Army is, and senior leadership in the Army is all about signing it off and getting it done. And that is probably applicable to when we're on operations and someone has to make a decision and there has to be an action. But when we're transforming the organisation, when we are changing, when we're looking at force structure changes, it is a massive collegiate approach to what we are doing. Because 7 or 8 men and women sitting on the board of Army, which I was privileged enough to do for a while, cannot understand or make all the decisions. It's a wide, broader, collegiate approach. So it is that idea that I took into my first 12 days. It's got to be a collegiate approach. And then I spent a lot of time trying to work through what are the barriers that stop people being empowered. A lot of good leaders, a lot of keen, enthusiastic people, an organisational culture that seems to have a can-do attitude. So why isn't it can-doing? Is it that the previous administration didn't empower them to do that? I'm interested in their ideas. I'm trying to plug the pieces. And what I find, and going back to your puzzle analogy, what I found in the Army Reserve, I would go and talk to people. I would have this view, this equation idea, and I knew I needed blocks of answers. And I'd go and talk, even I went to Western Australia and spoke to some medical people, rank of corporal, sergeant, private soldier. And they all talked to me about their view. And I thought, hang on a minute. Okay, if I take that piece of what you're telling me, it doesn't quite fit the context, but I can put it into my mind over here, and that resolves one of my problems. And so that ability to bring people on, to share their ideas, to understand what they want, because everyone wants to contribute to the way ahead. Very few people come to work and say, "Oh, I'm not going to contribute. I don't want to be enthusiastic." It's how you bring that in, and then as a senior leader, how you make that fit the puzzle that you're trying to resolve, and then celebrate it. So I sent a note back to the Western Australian Medical Company, thanking them for the visit and thanking them for their ideas, and telling them that I was going to use some of those ideas moving forward. I think that's where I am.
You touched on, I know you talked before about the deliberate vision for reform at the head of Army, perhaps with those newer employees coming in, and I think permafrost is the language you've used in the past, in the middle. How do you make sure you do hear what, it would be easy for you to walk in full kit and say, tell me anything, and there to be tumbleweeds and crickets in the room. How do you make sure you stay connected across an organisation as large as Army?
So once I knew that I had General Campbell's support for the change, that was absolutely very important, and that I had, let's call it the Board of Army support for the change. So all the generals who ran the Army were all saying, yes, we need this. I took the senior leadership of my organisation, the Reserve, so I was a Major General. The senior leadership was all the brigade commanders, all brigadier generals. And we discussed, we spent a couple of months trying to work out how this was going to change and bringing them all on board. And everyone, because they were all state-based, there was always implications in each state for the culture and the demographic makeup. So we did that. And so we had a good strategic plan, and then I and the brigade commanders would go out to all the organisation and start talking about the change of capability and what this might mean, and the opportunities and the value proposition and all those things. At the same time, the next rung down of leaders in the Army is the battalion and regimental commanders. They are the lieutenant colonels. And what we did, we brought them all in on a number of weekend workshops. And I would simply say, this is the outcome that I think I'm after. You are the experts in your field. Give me the answer operationally to how I'm going to do this. So each brigade across Australia had a logistics battalion, making 6 logistics battalions to support this. To the logistic battalion commanders and their regimental sergeant majors, the senior soldiers of those, it was, how do I make this work? How do we do this? Western Australia has a different capability to South Australia, to New South Wales. How do we support each other? Can you give me the answer? And we adopted that answer operationally in more or less the same, in more or less total. And so now I have my battalion commanders, and I'm always listening. And then I would visit just about every training opportunity I had. And I was away a fair bit on weekends. And I would listen to what my corporals and sergeants and warrant officers had to say, and what the lieutenants and captains, the junior officers had to say. And you picked up fairly quickly where there were impediments to the process, or which organisations weren't 100% committed to what we were trying to do. And that went on for 4 years, understanding, engaging, and getting it working.
You mentioned the batteries of change model, I guess the idea of energy in the system. You talked about working lots of weekends. How did you maintain your own energy across this very large transformation agenda?
We've talked a little bit in the past about what used to keep me awake at night. So here I am. I have an idea. It's supported by the Chief of the Army and the Board of Army, the CASAC. And you get there and go, my God, have I got this right? I am changing an iconic institution of our nation. It has steeped in values, traditions and history. Have I got this right? This could be a catastrophe if I haven't. What used to keep me awake at night. So my energy was about the promises that I'd made, the analysis I had done, my experience, and about seeing it through. And at one point I realised I had to change the mantra because we were getting small success. So I went from saying, this is what we're going to do, to being able to say, this is what we have achieved. Look at what we have achieved. And then this is where we need to go next and break it down. And so you begin to energise yourself because, yes, we have achieved that. And the senior leadership buy in more, and the junior leadership buy in more, and the middle management leadership buy in more because you're now talking, I have done this. Look what we've done. So let's celebrate that. Hey, there's more to go. I've got a long way to go, and it's still going on past my time. But that gave the whole organisation energy. And what it did, it gave acceptance. In 2016, I went to Katana, which is a major military training area out of Adelaide. And the army was on display in a major warfighting exercise. And the reserve battle group went in, and some of my greatest regular army detractors, some of that permafrost level across a number of different headquarters, I walked into the command post and they said, "So you wouldn't believe it, your guys are killing it. They're doing a really good job." I would never have thought it. Celebrate the success at that point. And that was probably the fundamental turning point for the whole organisation.
We'll shortly capture some questions from the room, but I'm just wondering, Stephen, if I worked for you, what are your non-negotiables as a leader?
Honesty, trust and loyalty. And I say that in my own example. General Campbell and I had known each other all our careers. And I knew I could make the change. He agreed. But it was not going to be without some serious discussions along the way. And we had loyalty to the organisation and to the army and to the soldiers both ways. For me, it was about trust and honesty. Sir, we've done this, but I need this. I didn't think of this. And I was quite happy to have those open and honest discussions with the seniors, just as I was happy to have open discussions with anyone. So I'm quite willing to put myself out there. I'm quite willing to have people come and argue against my ideas. And invariably you go, geez, you know what? I didn't think of that. That's really good. Thanks for that. Don't close yourself off. So it's about being open and receptive. And leaders must be engaged. And the other thing that you would find for me is I'm always after, if I have competent leaders, I'm always after empowering them. Getting them to do what they need to do, getting them to achieve, listening to their ideas, getting them to get on with what they need to do.
Fantastic. So I'm wondering if we could perhaps collect some questions from the audience, Tony.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to say, so we have questions coming in from our people online. And please just wrap those up and remember to write your name on them if you would. And just before we start taking your questions, I just want to make a couple of comments. Stuck in my head, Stephen, so sorry, is this concept of a brew fest, which, thank you so much, which there's no need to talk a little more about that, I'm sure. And I was very taken with your comment about my responsibility, my mistake. I think that's one of those extraordinary things that we just, it is sometimes challenging to use the first person and make that statement. And I also love, we work in the complexity space and a sense of ambiguity. And I love this question I think I'm after. I could imagine that for some people that would just drive them entirely crazy. But to actually make the statement, I think I'm after, putting it in that context, I think that's really quite extraordinary. Now, I'm going to do my very best here and I thank you so much for these extraordinary questions. So one of them here is, what were the existing strengths of the organisation and how did you use that to support the transformation? This is from Bev. Thank you very much, Bev. And how did you deal with those people who didn't want to come on the capability journey?
That's great question. That's great. In the main, the people give up their spare time to become part-time soldiers because they want growth, or they want a challenge, or they want an opportunity. And that was very evident in our organisation. There were a large number of our people who thought that they could get more out of the reserve. And so we tapped into that, because now we were talking about growth and opportunity and the ability to get out and do some real soldiering, and the opportunity of using the modern equipment and the opportunity of using that generation and being involved with the whole army. So there was a thirst for that, and there were some really capable people. So we tapped into that strength. That was that first bit. How do we do that? What was the next part of the question?
Resistors.
The resistors. There's always going to be resistors, and you would talk to them. And in many ways, there is always an anxiety to change, and you've got to get through. They've got to understand what that anxiety is. In many cases, our resistors had believed that the current model of service was appropriate, and that there was no need to change. And I was asking for far too high a commitment from our people. You know, the mantra was one Tuesday night a week, one weekend a month, and a 14-day camp every year. Now I'm beginning to throw courses online. I'm challenging people to actually come along and learn more and be more capable. I wanted a portal whereby if I was doing an activity on a weekend, I could sit on the bus on a Friday as a junior leader and log in on my phone and actually have video of what I was going to do, so I was feeling more competent and more capable, so that I could refresh myself. And that, in the end, became the Cove, which QUT's been involved with later on. So I needed to do that. But the resistors, in the end, when I changed from what I was going to do to celebrating what I have achieved, or what we have achieved, not I, what we achieved, then some of that resistance barrier came down. In other cases, I mean, I can remember having a discussion with a couple of gentlemen in Townsville, and they said to me, "You've only got a 2-year tenure, and this will change, and we will wait you out," because that's what we've done. General Campbell then gave me 4 years, which was because that's what I needed to do the change, and that was a clear message to the organisation what he wanted. There was a clear message what we wanted, and those people had the opportunity of coming along or leaving. But the other thing I did with the resistors was, some of their anxiety was the fact that they could no longer do or be part of that deployable organisation. So I'm a number of years into my reserve career. I like the reserve, but I can no longer be on the front line because the capability is too high for me. But behind each organisation that goes to the field, there must be the administration, there must be the looking after of equipment. And so I offered a proposition to these people: you're just as valuable. Someone's got to look after this. It can't be the guys going forward, because we're part-time. If you're in that capability brick that is deployed, you need to do that. You haven't got the time to do all this equipment preparation and the administration. I need other people to do that for me. And some of them came along on that journey too.
Stephen, I have to say, and everybody, thank you very much. So many of these questions really are about resistance to change. And there's one comment here about how do you resist the pull of the past, which I think resist the pull of the past.
Yeah.
So maybe, and that might really wrap up, and I do apologise for those of you who have asked related questions. That might sort of sum that up beautifully for us, perhaps.
If you can imagine, the first meeting I had with senior leadership of the reserve about what I thought was a transformation was a most difficult day, as I was trying to convince, put the argument, put the why out there, and they all got it. I go, yep, but in my context and in my state, and this is going to be difficult. And you know, there was the anxiety of change as they realised they were going to be stuck in this, and they all got it. They were all enthusiastic, but it was all that, my God, I'm going to have to lead this. This is, and you make that why. So as you can imagine, the organisation was to see what we wanted to do, had some real issues with trying to convince people, and yet at the lower level, our soldiers and our junior NCOs and our junior leaders, they grabbed it. You know, young, keen, enthusiastic. Yeah, I'm giving up my part-time. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. I want to be part of the army. So you've got this organisational structure down here, which is keen and enthusiastic, and then on the way up, you've got problems with the change anxiety. And it's really about giving people confidence and saying, actually, you know what, we're in this together. And I was very clear. If we made errors, they were mine. Competence, etc., out the way. But if it was organisational, structural, it was training errors, I would say, oh, well, I got that wrong. Not you got that wrong. I owned it. And that gave people confidence that they could try things as long as they had explained it, and as long as they were safe, as long as there was a competency in what they were doing. You're incompetent, there's other things, or if you breach safety, there's absolutely, that's non-negotiable. But we owned it, and then the senior leadership would own it. And so we gave people confidence.
Now this is, we're getting to the no holds barred kinds of questions here, everyone. And some of the things that I'm sure for you as senior leaders really have top of mind. So this is an interesting question. It's asking about innovation and value in the context of a very large organisation in terms of the Army. So innovation is often treated as a function rather than a philosophy, and often unconnected to the reason or the why of the organisation, and therefore with questionable value. So how do you see innovation fitting into transformation?
So we needed, right across the Army over this period, we needed to appreciate what our people are seeing and how they thought innovation might go. General Caligari ran an organisation called DiggerWorks, and what he would do was take valuable insights and innovation ideas from the soldiers, sometimes on the front line in Afghanistan and Iraq, sometimes at home, and where it made sense to do so, he would make those changes. And he had the power and the budget to be able to do some of that minor changing work, which made soldiers more effective. For my mind, innovation is so terribly important. We ran innovation days. Tell us what you think, and innovation around drones was also important. I had a problem that the surveillance that I had was not as effective as it could be. And so one of my leaders in the signals and technology world came up with, hey, why don't we plug a couple of drones in, get them off the shelf, be able to link them up, and you've got cameras on them and you can cover that areas. You go, wow, yep, didn't think of that. That's great. And for a small outlay, you could achieve much in that space. So I think some innovation ideas are meant for the future, and you park them and put them there. Some innovation ideas can be acted on now. But in general terms, I found I didn't get so many innovation ideas from left field that I couldn't use, or that I wouldn't take forward and try and put it into Army's innovation space. Whether it got up as a priority and was then funded was the problem that we all have. Because 90% of the innovation ideas you'd like to fund, but you just can't.
Wonderful,
some
thank
way.
you. Now, I'm going to, this is a question from online, and the questioner actually has made very clear. It says, note, I'm currently a senior officer in the Defence Force.
Right.
So,
My goodness.
I'm watching.
General Campbell.
Yes, General Campbell. Good morning.
So, and I think there might be some messages in here that you might need to explain to us as we go. So when we talk about transformation through sound leadership, the military has an advantage as there is a defined hierarchy or rank structure based on respect for rank, not necessarily the person. How can your philosophies transfer to a civilian environment where there is no defined rank structure and structures are flatter? Most staff are not necessarily, do not necessarily associate a position with rank and may not have the same level of respect for the position.
Thank you. I have found in my previous employment as a CFO and my employment now as a CEO, that people do appreciate positions. In every organisation, there is a hierarchy. I would concur that it is not the hierarchy of the military. But everyone knows that for those senior executive positions that they have responsibility and they have a value. If then the senior executive can empower and value and demonstrate and support the next manager down, then you will find that the staff in general terms, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, you'll find the staff then understand that that manager is going to be supported and they report to that. So there is, I have found, now I'm only 3 organisations in from my military service, but I've found that there is respect, but not the respect given by rank in the military. I would agree with that. It's more about respect built by the individual and how they relate to their people and how their decision-making works, how inclusive and collaborative they can be.
Mm.
So, I just, I'm only early days, but, it's clear everyone in my new organisation understands who the CEO is, and what I'm trying to do is empower the middle leadership of that organisation.
And I guess you've spoken before about compliance of doing what you tell me to because you're in charge versus the discretionary effort of engagement. And I can see where we're headed.
Yeah. See, I was really lucky in the reserve because the reserve you had to engage and you had to empower and you had to bring them along for the journey. And I do make the point, there's a far distinction from that sort of service to what goes on the front line in a ship or an aircraft or in the army. Because at that point where things are going really wrong, there is a leader and there are orders and you do execute them. And that's fundamentally what happens on operations. But in these other spaces where we're trying to build full structure, then there is this opportunity to be collaborative. There is this opportunity to listen and empower people.
I have this question from Jody. Thanks so much, Jody. It says, did you have any setbacks or fails, and how did you use this to pivot for recovery?
Do you have any setbacks? Yes.
He's sitting in the hot seat.
Yes,
so,
every organisation in transformation does have fails. I think one of the things I tried to accelerate far too quickly was online training, and just had to adjust that back a little bit as we went forward. The idea of the significant commitment that this would take probably needed to be wound back because people couldn't support that going forward. So we had to just watch that because there's commitment to the part-time force is about a relationship between the person serving, their family, and their employer. Most people are employed, so you're trying to match that up. And if you demand too high a commitment over here, then either the family is going to suffer, in which case you won't get the guy or girl back because at home is problematic, or there is this massive tension between the person and their employer because they're always away. Oh, I'm going to army. Most employers are very good about service, as long as it doesn't impact the business, significantly. So I think there was a couple of points where we said, oh, that's not working. So the way I approached that was I didn't want to change things too much. You can change your mind once. I believe you change your mind once, but if you do it 2 or 3 times, it shows that you've actually been a bit incompetent in the whole thing, unless something else has changed in the environment. So we'd go back and analyse it. I can remember sitting with senior leadership in about 2016, and we're just going, oh, we got that wrong. Yep, that is not right. We need to change this, analysed it, brought in the change, acknowledged that we'd made an error. I acknowledged that I'd made an error, and we drove on from there and improved. And after leaving the organisation, my successor has actually answered some of those fundamental questions in a different way. By the time I got to 4 years and made the change, I had reached that point, and I recognised I had reached that point in my service where actually I was the problem because I was so stereotyped in the way I was thinking. And Catherine came in and took command of the division and was that senior reserve officer, and almost overnight, with a fresh set of eyes, just was changing it and actually moved the organisation a quantum leap again. And I suppose that's why you need that.
So 2 more. Here at the graduate school, we talk about blue circle work. So taking what we currently do and currently have and enhancing that and working on it, and then green triangle work. So the new and the innovative and the dramatic change, discontinuous change. So this is a question about blue circle work from Bev. And it says, what were the existing strengths of the organisation and how did you use those and leverage those to support transformation?
The strength of the organisation, the history, the values and traditions of the Army, the first thing would be something. And in transformation, there is always an idea that you can chuck everything out. An iconic organisation like the Army, you don't do that. Why would you? That history, values and tradition gave us links back to the past, to what had gone on, to the AIF, to what had gone on in Korea and to some extent in Vietnam, and that model of service. So people are in the organisation because they want to serve, and if we can change the organisation so that they deliver more capability, it links them back to the past. So you reinforce that idea. The strength of the organisation was also keen, enthusiastic people who wanted to make a difference, who wanted to be challenged, who wanted to be given another opportunity. So you pick that up and you say, yep, I can give you this challenge. It's going to change your commitment level. It's going to change some of the nature of your employment and family relationships for a period of time. But I can give you that. So we used that, and it's amazing what you can do with enthusiastic, keen people who are then provided a direction and watch them go and achieve. And as we achieved, they became more keen and enthusiastic with what they were doing. So that was that sort of component to the piece. Have I answered the whole question?
You have, absolutely. Thank you. So here's the last terrifying question, and I did not write this. From the audience, it says, if you had to lead the transformation again, what would you do differently?
I had to lead the transformation again. I think I would engage earlier with some of the influential stakeholders. I think one of my errors was that I left that engagement far too late. And I'll give you an example, which I hope he won't mind me using. When he was Governor of New South Wales, General David Hurley, now Governor General, rang me, and unusual for General Hurley to ring. I had served with General Hurley previously, and he said, "You need to come and see me." Why did he want to see me? Because the state governors are the regimental colonels in our hierarchy of each of the regiments in their state. So if you imagine along the old traditional lines, a regimental colonel is someone of influence who is a ceremonial figurehead for the regiment. And the associations had been really a bit disenfranchised. I hadn't got the old associations sorted. I hadn't been talking to them. I was too worried about the internal and external piece. And so General Hurley rang and he said, I need to see you in Sydney. I went, okay. So I flew down to Sydney to see him. And he basically said to me, what are you doing? And I said, oh, well, yeah, you know, we talked about this a little while ago. I'm doing this, A, B, C, D. And I went, right, that makes sense. Okay. Why? Because I'm being hit up almost every day by associations who are saying this guy's destroying the reserve. And then he said to me, oh, by the way, next time you're around at each of the states, you better drop in and see the state governors because they're all getting this sort of a view that you're destroying it, you're not adding any value. What you've said to me makes sense. And I think it's great and it should go on. And so what I hadn't recognised, and that was a lesson for stakeholders, full stop. So then I began to have a look at it and go, yeah, it's not only the associations, it's anyone who's associated with this change, because people will always, when you change, people will always tend, when there's no information, to think you are going to change it for the detriment. It's against my organisation. I served and you're destroying it and I don't understand it. And therefore I'm going to complain to my nearest advocate. And you can't get higher than the state governors in their states for the advocates that can put pressure on you. And that was one of my, I think that whole stakeholder engagement just didn't get it. I should have been out there once we decided, I should have been out there in the early years explaining it to people. And then I went around the country and had dinners in each state for association members who would like to come and join me, and tried to explain what I was doing. But what helped me was when I changed from what I was going to do to what we have achieved. And that really helped me explain it at that point. Because I showed I wasn't tearing down the organisation.
Wonderful, thank you very much. That brings to conclusion the question section. Major General Stephen Porter, thank you very much. And Stephen will be here afterwards if you want to ask a question. So let's give him a great big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I just wanted to give you a couple of words about what this series actually is. But before we do that, Stephen has an announcement.
General Campbell, the Chief of the Defence Force, has agreed to partake in Section 5, and I'll be just a sort of an interview with General Campbell. And for those who don't know General Campbell, he was Chief of the Army under the transformation that I led, and now he's leading our Defence Force. I think it's fabulous that he would consider giving up his time to partake in this. So I wish everyone could come back and listen to General Campbell. He's got some fabulous insights into a whole range of issues.
So, and of course, we'll make sure that you're all invited to that. So please make sure that you stay in touch. And I'll just give you a quick idea. So it says up there, part 5. So we're at part 1 right now. What's happening here? So we have, for those of you who would like to participate, we actually have a series that we help you work your way through these stages of transformation. I do realise that's a little difficult to read, so I'll just give you a very quick insight. So today is launch, and we get to hear the insights directly from Major General Stephen Porter. And next, the next one-day workshop is an unpacking and exploration of the batteries. It's linked to the enterprise transformation work that Stephen and Angus Campbell actually did. And we put that in your context. So what does it mean to you, and how does this actually work for you? In the second part of that, then we go on and actually help link those change drivers to vision and purpose in your organisation. The third part is that really critical part of culture and how we actually align culture with what we want for our organisation in the future. We have what we call an at work, so we have intensives that in groups from your organisations, if you choose to join us, where we actually help you and support you through that actual design of the transformation process and structure for you your way to embed that in your organisation. And then finally, there'll be a wrap up here with, as Stephen says, General Angus Campbell. So on that note, I would just like to, Amanda is actually going to close for us, and thank you, Stephen.
Rowena.
Oh, did I say, I have done that before. I do, Rowena, and I know exactly who you are, and I see you every single day. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Cathy, as well, for your leadership here. So I'm Rowena Barrett, Executive Director at QUT Entrepreneurship. And Stephen, I really enjoyed hearing the story of the transformation of the Army into one force, where capability and culture has been developed to deliver consistent, capable, ready and reliable service, regardless of how people are engaged with the Army. And you've done this by working on those different blocks in the transformation equation. So whether it's structure, training, recruitment, leadership, management, reward, or the location people are in. I was struck by the use of the term value proposition, and you used that a number of times when you spoke. And I think for me, it described how you do what you do together with the people that you serve. And you spent quite a bit of time trying to find what that was by being out in the field, talking to a whole range of people, because we know that organisations can only deliver value when their members value the work that they do and know how it fits together within the organisation. So you've been very humble as a leader, and the transformation that's been kicked off in the Army is incredibly powerful. And I would encourage all of you to take this enterprise transformation conversation further. I think there's great learning here for many organisations, even those that I deal with who are creating new organisations. If you get the blocks right to begin with, then you can have a transformative organisation that delivers value right from the start. So Stephen, thank you very much for your presentation this morning. We look forward to working with you through this conversation. And here's a small gift.
Oh, thank you, Rowena. Thank you very much. Thanks for summing it up too. Good on you. Thank you.
Rowena, thank you so much, and a masterful wrap-up, I must say, thank you. And I just like to thank Stephen for your generosity, and I love that comment that you made, Rowena, about humble. That is absolutely so true of this gentleman. When I asked him about Order of Australia, he talked about his family and the sacrifices they made, not what the sacrifices that he made. And finally, I'd like to thank my colleague, Cathy C. We do wonderful work together, and I really appreciate your time. I love the questions. Thank you so much, and hope to see more of you very soon. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.